welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a manatee. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, here is the manatee. They're super cute. So we're just going to get started using gray. The biggest thing we're going to need to do is avoid line conflicts. I'm going to start down in here. Just like when we're building up fur, I'm going to do, a stroke and then one in between. However, they don't really have fur. They have a few little bits of hair coming off, and we'll do that later. It's all in the same gray color. We don't need to, worry about our stroke length because, there's no, we typically, when I draw at the length of the fur, but since there's no fur, it's just skin. There's no need to worry about that. So middle here we're coming straight down, but you can see on the side I twisted it, so it's my attempt to avoid line conflicts. If I get this in now, I can make sure I don't accidentally have the lines going the wrong way. So this is still a sketching step, and as I've said before, you don't have to do this step. I tend to because I don't want to try and sort out what direction I should be drawing in when I'm adding highlights and shadows. When I'm adding highlights and shadows, I just want to focus on adding highlights and shadows. And so I don't want to have to worry about that. It's just one less thing to think about, basically. Now, because they don't have hair, I do need to be a little more careful on the edges, but because this style is a little bit more sketchy, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. But I will be more careful in not having a stroke go way off, because that won't look right. They're pretty interesting. Right, so their mouths are kind of big, and then you kind of come up. That'll help also differentiate the space by having it come up and then loop it up. We're kind of visually that we'll see that. Their noses are also interesting in that this isn't a gap. It's got they've got like flaps over their noses. So we'll draw this out separately from the rest of it to indicate that it's not connected. It doesn't flow into the rest of the body. And then, on the bottom it kind of does. So bringing that up. I've got tons of wrinkles. We'll be adding that in more in the highlights and shadows if I do decide to try and put in all that extra detail. Detail's great. I love adding detail to things. I think the more ways you can find detail and ways to add detail, the better. Okay, so coming up the head, coming straight up. I'm actually going to draw from the top of the head, and then we'll loop it just like we did down below. It'll be a little easier to draw it when we're looping it down. It'll be easier to keep those lines straight. See, I'm looping in. This is how I'm going to keep the line straight. It's a little easier than just trying to draw that line, right? You can see my hand won't keep that straight. But if I'm coming down on an angle like this, you have this edge that creates. I've at least found it to be more helpful to draw that way. And then the same thing on the other side, just kind of go in the opposite direction, pulling it in. Just sort of connecting it all together. And then it's just, it's important to avoid line conflicts, especially on something like this. Sometimes you can get away with it with fur because you can just, make it look like the fur direction's going in different ways. It's a little harder on a figure where you don't have that necessarily. But there is an edge here, right? So as we come to the edge of like the mouth, we can change that direction without it looking funny because there's an edge, right? So that can make a difference too. So even with the eye, making sure that this is still following the contour, otherwise it does get awkward. And with eyes, we need to be careful. The first thing that we see that we're drawn to as people are eyes. See here, I can have a slight change of direction because one is there's a gap, right? His face bulges forward, it blocks the rest of it. So I can change this direction if I want to, which I am just a little bit. And two, like he has these wrinkles coming off the way his head's shaped, so it probably would make sense to do, and then we'll loop it back down, right? So bringing it in this way, and then looping it back down, and there won't be any line conflicts as a result. And then, same sort of thing on this side. Bring it down, you have the eye. Making sure there's no conflicts. And how we're drawing that. And then looping this in to the head, to his mouth, I guess, really, not to his head. This is his head. And bringing this down. Right, bringing it down, connecting in there. And then looping it back down. So that in the middle it's coming straight down. Getting the sense form. Kind of see the little manatee there. For the chin, same kind of thing, right? Bottom lip, I guess. Come straight down the middle and then angle it from the sides as you bring that off. Angling it over. All the way to the mouth. And then angling it the opposite way on the left side. And bringing that all the way over. Now the reason I opted to do a full body instead of just a portrait, because typically I do portraits instead of full bodies like this, but I know from experience that drawing sort of big roundish sea animals, that when you're just drawing their head, it doesn't always translate. I've done it with seals and I've learned I have to draw a little bit more. If you end up with just a circle, sometimes you can make it work if you can cut the composition right, but in a case like this, it's going to be easier to get the impression of the animal itself if you draw the whole thing. So you can see I changed line direction several times there, right? So edge of his little flipper thing, so it doesn't matter that we're running this in one way and these lines coming down in another. Now the flipper itself would be an edge, but that means that, the lines on this and this don't have to be going the same direction as everything else, and these guys I just looped down. We were already looping down anyway, so I just made sure to loop them down into the flipper. We're going to bring them straight down to the tip and do exactly what we did with everything else, right? On that tip, change that direction and change the direction the other way for the other side. Same thing over here. Now their bodies aren't perfectly straight, so that also helps. Or don't have to keep it perfectly even, because they have, you know, humps and and bulges, and they're you know, not, they don't have like a straight edge. They have a lot of bumpiness to them, so that's going to help us. But if you have like one line coming way off, that would be noticeable. But otherwise, it's not being straight, you know, not the end of the world. They aren't really. So same thing, bringing this all the way to the tip, and then looping that tip on one side and then the other. And then just bringing it down, but we don't have to worry about, so right, I'm changing the direction, although I guess I'm not really. You know, he probably has some thickness happening here, right in the midsection here, so we're changing that by having his stomach look like it's bulging a bit, changing that line direction, bringing the middle still straight down towards his tail. His tail's that point I'm aiming for. And then everything else going to kind of bulge instead. And we're going to have, you know, this point acting as our direction change point, because this is technically where it would, in the way that we're drawing this composition. Right, come straight down, because there's going to be a dip at the tail. Still see it, we'll still connect that in, but there's a dip there. Right, and then bringing this straight down, treating it almost as a separate section, but we'll be connecting that in a bit. Shadows and highlights will really flesh that out. So these middle lines, again, bringing that straight down, and then, you know, as you come off to the side, angling those a little differently. Especially because some of the tail is blocked by the body. Now that he's all sketched out and looking cute as can be, usually I don't have the sketch on, but I'm going to have to. We're going to start with the shadows and highlights. So, Manatee, who's swimming. I'm going to have the light source coming from straight above. I often do this with sea animals, right? So light source coming from straight up, as if he's swimming in the ocean. In this case, that does mean that there might be an edge, particularly the top, that is not in shadow. I know I say all edges are in shadow, but that does depend on your light source. So in this case, with it coming straight up, it won't be. The head will be in highlight. Because of the angle, you know, a lot of his face is going to be in highlight, which is perfect, because if that's not true, I would consider a change in how I'm drawing it and where my light source would be. But with a light source coming from above, you have, you know, his eyes are still going to hit highlight, his nose here is going to have highlight, and then the shadowing will be underneath. Now, I don't often do this. I've only done it for a handful of things, and it's always when I do sea life. So it does require me to think a little bit more about the placement of my highlights and shadows. But it is just full pin pressure, right? They're this gray color. So we're just going to put full pin pressure all the way to that edge. And follow the lines we've already started. Right, so we have these lines in place. We're just following that direction with that pin pressure. And adding more, basically. Filling up more than what we did before. Now there are the wrinkles to consider. When you're doing that, I'm gonna actually do some shadowing on them, right? So just a little bit, lessening my pin pressure, bringing that down. We'll see how this goes. It's a lot easier to add highlight than it is to take away highlight, so we'll add the shadow in, and if we don't like it, we can turn it to highlight. Add the shadow on these wrinkles. So again, this is just light pen pressure. We'll do it a little bit under the eyes too, because they have some bulging there. So a little bit under here. And here. Still following the strokes, right? I'm still following the lines we've already done, but drawing over the wrinkles. It's probably opposite. A little bit here. They're such cute animals. So back to that full pen pressure. I'm going to come to the edge of these wrinkles. Kind of need to be tapered in, but we're going to be able to do some of that. Actually, I wonder if I can take this off. And you can see it's full pen pressure in between where I've drawn these wrinkles. This would all still be in highlight. And when we come underneath them, that is going to have to change. We're just going to switch over to shadow, basically all the way underneath. Now the edge of his mouth will be in shadow, right? So the edges outside of the top, all the other edges will be in shadow. So as we come to the edge here, because it'd be rounding away, right? Light source from above, so this is rounding in. And then especially as we come down, all of this starts transitioning into shadow down here. But let's get back up into here. Do the other side first. Help me remember that's there. Right back to that full pen pressure. You can kind of see how the wrinkles are looking. We're probably, so you know how deep or shallow something is indicated by how deep that shadow is. So if we need to temper it off, we can also do that. We would do that just by filling it in a bit. So I can lessen it by brightening up the areas that we've shadowed in effect, and then have a highlight come all the way to the edge. Now light source coming from above. So I'm going to say the bottom edge of this eye would definitely be in some highlight. Got some wrinkling, so highlighting around that. Whereas the upper edge is likely in shadow, where it's sort of humping into the eye. And then we'll need to be mindful of exactly where under his head here starts transitioning into shadow. Not yet, I don't think. I think the light would still be splashing down on him to here. Now I like to pull back. It gives me the full view of what's happening, so you can kind of see how that's sort of shaping out. I think I am going to temper off these wrinkles a bit, so you don't always know until you're getting into it. So to temper them again, I'm just going to draw light pen pressure on the areas that we've already created as wrinkles, and it's going to temper how deep they seem, how dark they are. See now if I pull back, they're a bit more a bit more tempered there. Still there, but not as dark. I'm just brightening up some of this too. I guess the more clear that is, the easier that'll read as wrinkles as well. As more clear the highlights are. Alright, now over here, starting to transition the edge to shadow, because it is starting to round away there. So lighter pen pressure just on that edge. Full pen pressure though still elsewhere. So starting from under here, we're going to have some shadowing for sure. Just bringing that up until, I think maybe right in here might be a transition where it starts rolling underneath. So then it's full pen pressure until then. You want to taper that off. So you don't want this to be a harsh transition. You want it to gently kind of go into that shadow. Same thing on this side, right, with the eye, you know, right where the eye is connecting into shadow, but underneath in highlight. Going back into shadow. Now I need to be careful because I've already decided where the shadow will be kicking in, so I need to make sure I'm consistent on both sides. Especially because his head is mostly straight up and down, so there wouldn't really be a difference there. And then making sure my highlight is pulling down the same distance and blending in. And just like before, you can see the where we've tempered off the wrinkles on, you know, this right side. But on the left, he's still got quite deep, so we're gonna temper those off too. Again, just a little bit, not a lot of pen pressure. Just enough to make them seem not quite as extreme as they are right now. And then around his nose here. A little bit of shadowing on his nose. Around the edges. Just going to make sure that these are straight. Or at least are perceptibly straight. They don't have to be perfect. A little bit more than they are. And then we have some shadowing, so we're going to put a little bit of that here, right on the edges. There's an actual gap where there's a slit that goes into the nose. So light pen pressure here, down the edge. Yeah, it's on the edge. And then we'll go back to full pen pressure here on the nose because it's got like this flat spot. then of course, you know, full pen pressure around it. I think it does kind of go into it here. Not really a gap underneath, just kind of circled on the top. So same thing over here. So bring it down. Not really gapping underneath. Right there. There we go. That kind of looks like their noses. Now I'm going to bring this down and then we'll flip it because I want to make sure. Actually, I may do the whole muzzle in shadow first. That'll let me really decide where I want the shadows and highlights to cut in or out. Just making sure they're all kind of roughly in the same place here before I start that. All right. So all of this in shadow, right? It's coming underneath, but it's rounded, so it's going to come up and in shadow for just a little bit. Plus, they have a ton of like wrinkles through here. So I might be able to highlight and shadow on the wrinkles. Add some detail. Now some of this will be highlight, right? I'm just filling in the whole thing as a shadow first. All right, now we are going to further in the highlights. So the highlights will likely come down to about here before it transitions over to shadow, because that's where it's going to be looping in. So we're going to pull this forward, but there's also the wrinkles. I'm wondering if I should add them in now or if I should just brighten them up. So when I'm feathering this in, I don't have to put more pen pressure. I just have to put more lines. Because it already has lines, so adding extra lines is enough to brighten it up. So it doesn't take a lot of pressure to do this. And then we really can control, especially because this is such a big sort of long area, we control where we're switching over from highlight to shadow. It's creating a little bit of a line here, but we can fix that after after we fill it all the way in. Partly by brightening up what we're doing now, we'll fix it, right? So if I come in here and just brighten up, especially where this connection is, it'll make that line kind of disappear. I'm also fixing this seemed a little darker than the areas around it. Right, so if I put a little bit more pin pressure in here, I can make that go away. There's no more clear and obvious line where it transitioned from highlight, from us putting full pin pressure to lighter pin pressure. Sometimes that happens because you're doubling up in a spot. So this just, you know, kind of gets rid of that. And if we back out now, it looks a lot better. I'm going to fix this bottom line, but this gets us roughly to the same spot so that we can line ourselves up. Okay, so now we're gonna take it and even all of this out. Okay. Now I am actually going to, and I know we're not done drawing him yet, but I am going to go in here and see about brightening up a few spots to indicate some wrinkling. It's probably too much right there. Of course, as that wrinkling goes into shadow, inevitably. So just backing off my pin pressure as I bring it down, and they have these, they kind of go straight down, these little wrinkle things that they have. Almost like they're whisker spots, maybe. That doesn't have to be a lot, because that gives us some, by tapering it off, it gives us some extra flexibility. Right, I don't have to do quite as much. Because we'll look at that and it'll still look like some wrinkling, right? When I pull back, that looks like wrinkling on his nose. Or his upper lip, muzzle. Okay. Now, gonna get his mouth. Likely will be in shadow, but we are gonna add a little bit of a burst. It's not gonna be a full highlight because it is under, his mouth here. With the highlight coming from straight above, I don't know that we would see really much of a highlight on his bottom lip. We're gonna give him a little bit. Because that'll help indicate to us it's rounded if I can give his lip just a slight, highlight and shadow change. Even if it stays in shadow, right, there's gradations to how much we can push something. So all of this right now, right, light pin pressure across the lip. Now we're going to give just that little bit of a, not adding full pin pressure, I'm just adding more lines, but mindful of how many lines, because as you saw up here, they can quickly accumulate to a full highlight. Just a few lines to indicate a hump. And kind of in the middle, so I'm not going all the way into the mouth, and I'm not bringing it all the way down. There we go. You can kind of get that sense there. There's that little bit of humping happening. Maybe a little bit more in the middle than on the peripheries. And since it's not one side or the other, it would come all the way, right all the way over. Same on both sides. Okay. Now for the rest of it, I'm going to do in shadow. There will be some highlighting popping up, but it's not going to be a lot, right? Because this is now tucked under him. So the rest of his body wouldn't really be catching the light from a source that's coming from straight above, but his little flippers probably are just a little bit. And like the side here, his back, almost in a silhouette kind of way, would be catching the light. So he would have a little bit of highlighting on both sides. So again, this is just, as always, light pin pressure. We can do nice long strokes, and we don't have to worry about the fact that he's bumpy, because they kind of are. We just need to keep our stroke lengths contained. Well, I'm not fixing bumps, I am fixing straight lines, right? He doesn't have fur, so I don't want a line like coming off. So as I bring it down, I am connecting those lines so that there's not any single ones sort of sticking out. I mean, one or two probably wouldn't be a big deal. And in the end, I'll probably have a few that do. But if it's something I can fix, I fix it. And this won't take long filling it in, right? Like just light pin pressure, making progress. After we get his second little, gosh, I don't know what they are. I guess they're fins, but they seem so bulky. Manatees, I almost want to call them something else, but after we get his little fins done, his body should be smooth sailing. We've already sorted out line direction. Shouldn't really be anything else that's going to complicate it. So we just follow these lines down, light pin pressure all the way down. Alright, and then it's just his tail. And then adding some highlights. Just like we did with the bottom lip, we're probably going to add a burst down his arms. That'll help indicate that they're there. Not a lot, because they would actually still mostly be in shadow, but there's probably a little bit of highlighting just along the backs here. With the light source coming from above, his body's going down, so I don't know how much would really be on the sides here. Probably not a lot, but probably some up in here. And likewise for his tail, I don't know that it would have a lot. Okay, now let's take a look at giving him some more highlights here. I'm gonna fix this as well. This seems a little too much, even though it's a wrinkle. Okay. It was almost like the line between his head and the rest of his body, and that's not. It was just a wrinkle. Okay. So there's probably some highlights coming down here. It would actually still potentially be a little bit on his back. Either way, there's that hump here is probably coming in here just a little bit. And along his hump. Same thing on this side. Okay, so now we're into his arm. Giving a little bit of burst to some wrinkling here. It's not heavy, not putting a ton of pin pressure, but I am putting a little. And obviously adding more lines. Yeah, you get that impression there. And then bringing that down. We'll do the same on the other side. Keep creating new layers because I'm not certain how far in this Highlights will come on the side. I am going to give him a little bit after all. Not a lot. Be angling down, but it would be catching the light on the back, so it would potentially be rounding over either side, giving him a little bit of a burst. Essentially it's the same with the tail. Now he's got a little bit of hair. So I'm just going to do very light. And by light, I mean I definitely am putting some pressure here, but yeah, you get the impression it's hair. Give a little bit more because they have enough coming over, but same here, right? Like they have a little bit, so it's not just yeah, all right. Now the last thing I sometimes do on animals like this is create a like reflected water effect. So when you do that, it's going to be in the highlights. And you're going to create kind of, you know, not even, not kind of squiggling it and adding some lines to mix in. Without going past the head. And after this, we'll do the eyes. We should be all set. Right, so continue squiggling it. So first I'm getting these very kind of fluid lines kind of going up and down, changing direction. And anywhere it's branching, looks like it could, creating a point that the reflection comes off of there. in that direction, whatever direction that is. And then after I do that, what I'm doing is I'm rubbing my pin back and forth over that area. Which brightens it up, but still keeps that kind of flow effect to it. And then kind of making sure it extends off, right? I kind of want this to fade because it's just a highlight. So I don't want the highlight to be pinpointed, although I mean it is, but if it's overly pinpointed, it'll look a little too much. As it is, this is always kind of a risk to do. You never know if it'll pay off. Sometimes I end up not doing it, but I think it's always worth trying because when it pays off, it looks really cool. Which, I mean, so far when you back out, you kind of get that impression. And it would fade out once it gets to a shadow or an area where it might not be as noticeable. With this turning down, it wouldn't really reflect as much, so fading that out probably still would up in here. Tweak it down. This is definitely one that as you're doing it will sometimes look worse before it looks better. And I think right now you can kind of, like when I pull back, I definitely get the impression this is water reflecting on his head, so I think it's past the point where it's not looking good. But it's definitely an experiment every time I do it. I've done this multiple times, and it's always one of those things that, you know, you don't, yeah, I mean, I know how to make it turn out, but it can be tricky making it work, basically. And sometimes I opt not to do it because of that. But when you can pull it off, it can look really awesome. It's just those connections. Pulling it down and, you know, creating these lines that would intersect and crisscross and everything else. And then just like on this side, fading it out as it comes down. So you need to match both sides, right? So I'm going to come back in here and do the squiggles, and what I'm doing there is I'm just doing this. I'm following the lines I already did, which were kind of like this, right? Jerking them up and down, and you know, if I come up, I branch it up, and if I come down, I branch it down. And then once I do that, I'm doing this on top of it. But where I'm fading it, I'm just doing this, right? Like I'm leaving this to stand instead of adding this on top. So if I want it to be brighter, as is the case for the left side, because I've done it on the right side, I need to do those squiggles on top of it. Not full pin pressure. I mean, I'm not holding back, but it's not, definitely not full pin pressure. And then I'm not going where his wrinkles are. That's in shadow, so it wouldn't be catching. Okay, and now bringing it down onto the top of the nose, because that would have it too. Or we've lessened it here, but we're going to bring it back into kind of full. And then fading it out once again as we come down. Now, do the same that we did up there, right? We're going to add these little squiggles, brighten it up. Alright, so now we pull back, and you can kind of see the two areas that are brighter look kind of like water reflecting. Which in turn gives the effect of the rest of this as water reflecting. Because we look at it and it kind of reads that way. Okay, so for their eyes are hard to see, potentially because underwater, you know, they have a film potentially covering it. So we are going to draw it as gray. Actually think what I'm going to do is draw it as gray but leave a like a spot for the pupil. We're not going to put a ton of pen pressure here or really lighten it up like we usually do for an eye. Just enough to suggest that something's there. Same thing on this side. Maybe use the select tool to sort out the angle. So I'm going to fill it all the way in. And we're going to take the elliptical marquee tool and erase it out. Just making these lines straight. Same thing with this side, just making the lines straight. What may also help is doing just a little bit of a highlight on the eyes. It wouldn't really have it, which is what I'm debating on, if I should add it or not. But man, would it be able to show up very nicely. We're going to leave it because they wouldn't have it. There you go. Alright, so that is how you draw a manatee. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.